In this video we're going to be taking a look at something I've gotten quite a few questions about, that being the different attributes weapons have. What I'm primarily going to be talking about here is weapon length and how that affects things. Now, I have sorted the weapons by length here. This might be too small to see depending on your monitor size, but the top weapon here is the Pike, and it has a weapon length of 5. And what that means is that in meters, this is the range that a weapon is able to affect an enemy in. The Danax has a weapon length of 2, and what that means is that each unit has an attack radius. So each cylinder on the battlefield, the units are represented as, I'm calling it cylinders. There are different shapes, there are ellipses and other things, but each man on the battlefield has a certain attack radius, where if a unit makes it inside his attack radius, then it has a chance of triggering an attack. Not an animation that you see on the battlefield, just triggering a roll for an attack. So the bigger the range of a weapon, the more, theoretically, the more units are going to be able to have their attack radiuses overlap enemies, and the more units are going to be able to have a chance to get an attack against an enemy. So one of the reasons why the Danax is so deadly is not just the bonus of 20 versus infantry, the high damage and AP, but also because the range allows it to hit enemies quickly, to get enemies inside of the radius before they get inside of the radius themselves, and also in melee blobs to reach more enemies with their attack radiuses. Something that is a bit weird about this is that the axe has a range of 2. The mace used to be the only other weapon with a range of 2. The mace wielded by some Persian units and others. Now they have 5 damage and 20 AP. They used to have 2 range, so they got buffed and nerfed at the same time. Now, one of the things I would like to see, and this is going to be the CA please portion of this video, the barbed lance, the barbed spear, the spear, the heavy spear, spear and heavy spear, and let's see, the lance and the elite lance, all of these weapons have a range of 1. One of the reasons why you would use a spear in the first place, except for it being cheap and fairly easy to make, is that it has a longer range. It works well defensively. Now, just imagine that a spear, all of these spears, the spear and the heavy spear, not the short spear, but the spear and the heavy spear. Imagine that these spears now get a range of 2. That should, in theory, mean that expert charge defense gets triggered faster when they get hit by cavalry, and it should allow them to hit cavalry before cavalry hits them, especially melee cavalry. However, the lance, in my opinion, should also get an increase in attack radius on the charge. Now, I realize that it's not feasible to have a unit having 2 weapons, so that they would have the lance 2 attack radius on the charge, and then the attack radius would drop, so I get that. But it would be very nice to see a range becoming a factor as well as just pure damage in terms of stats for different weapons. So the spears would be more viable because they would allow more enemies to attack at once, and they would allow more friendlies to attack at once. They would work better against cavalry and expert charge. They could work better against cavalry and blobs due to having a longer radius. And for example, giving the standard spear 2 reach, the heavy spear 2.5 reach, instead of having the 30 bonus, something that could be interesting to look at, would make spears more viable, more effective against infantry. And since we are, that's the main point of this video, weapon ranges. Why on earth the Danax is the only weapon with a 2 range, when the lances and the spears basically scream for having 2 range as well? Because if the lances had 2 range, that would in essence allow them to impale incoming enemy cavalry before they had a chance to hit the lances. Whereas now it's basically the lancers take damage from from units with much shorter weapons than they have. But we can take a look at some other things as well, just for fun while we're here. The bonus versus cavalry on the horsehewers, 30. The bonus, heavy spear, you know this, 30, the barbed spear 20, the standard spear, and the short spear is 10. So this is fairly standard stuff. Now if you look at the infantry, the heavy club wielded by the Langobards has a 20 bonus, the Dane axe has a 20 bonus, the club has a 10 bonus, the Conda has a 10 bonus, and the standard axe has a 5 bonus. And there's an attribute here that seems to be dead, the first strike attribute. The shield piercing attribute also seems to be dead. Now, and then we have gate damage, and this is a modifier that dictates how much damage is done to a gate, which isn't really that interesting. Just the daggers and spears not very good against gates, axes better against gates, and so on. Tusks fairly effective against gates. Foxes are horsehewers 0.1, 0.033, 0.066, so not really relevant for multiplayer, more single player type of thing. But yeah, the Falks, the Horsehewer, the Axe, and the Dane Axe, a lot more effective than the Spears, Lances against gates. Bit of a ramble, but main point here though is that weapon length in Attila is an absolute mess, and it makes a mess of especially spears, but also, in my opinion, shock cavalry on the charge. Having longer range would potentially make lighter shock cavalry units more viable, because it would allow them to kill quite a few of the enemy cavalry before they get hit by the impact of that cavalry themselves, if they had a range of, let's say, a range of 3 or 2.5, or I'm not really sure, but it would be something that would be very interesting to see. So that's it, probably the most boring video I'll ever make, but something that I think needed to be mentioned. Strength and honor.